This demo is very difficult to do, actually, because of working in very small areas that we're doing this. But with the help of these world famous videographers over here, I hope you'll be able to see on the screen some of the things that I'll be doing this evening. I want to talk to you about the equipment that I use, the method of putting patterns onto the piece that I kerm, and then doing carving on those patterns, and then putting the holes in it in order to make the patterns stand out. So that's the outline of the demo for this evening. We'll start with the tools that I use. I use two basic tools in doing all this. One of them is the Fordham, with the motor unit and the flexible shaft. And I've run through about 3 of these flexible shafts over the time that I've been using this, but the motor unit is just as strong as it ever was. So they do wear out. I've also been through a couple of hand pieces. They tend to wear out too when you stress them too much, and cutting tough wood like mesquite. And but it works really well. The Fordham is really a good tool. It will remove more wood faster than many of the other kinds of tools that you'll find. And so that's one of them. The other is the high-speed carver. And this, of course, goes with the air compressor, which is running right now, by the way. We'll talk about that in a minute. But the high-speed carver, you can buy these things for about $100 or more. The one I've got in my hand costs $550. If you buy one that costs $100, you'll be buying one every other month. If you buy one like this, it'll last you for years and years, because it will stand up. This is an oilless. It's got sealed bearings in it, and the old ones you used to have to oil them. A little hole up here, you put some oil in, and then you had to work it for a while so it didn't get all over your wood. But the new ones are oilless, and they have seal bearings, and they work really, really well. This particular handpiece is from a company called SCM, and there are several that make handpieces in this quality. SCM is one of them, and this is called the XS400. Turbo makes one also, and theirs is called the TS550. Both of them are in about the same price range, so I'm assuming that Turbo probably has the same quality that this does. I don't know because I haven't tried the Turbo. But anyway, that's what it is. You can get some, like I said, lesser ones from $100, or you can get a turbo. Actually, the turbo carver runs around $350. The Paragrave carver is essentially the same as this one, and runs in about the same price, $550 for a good handpiece. But they're very durable and will stand up to a lot of use. I've been doing this, my wife and I have been doing this since 1992, and this is the second handpiece that we have gotten in all that time, and we've used it a really, really hard time. So I recommend these. By the way, I have no stock in any of these companies, and but I'm going to tell you the names of the ones that I use and what I think is best in doing that. Like I said, I wished I had some stock in some of them, as much as I've spent from them. But air compressors. Any air compressor that will give you 45 psi is acceptable for running something like this. This takes about 1.5 cubic feet per minute air coming through it, and I generally run mine at 34 psi, but you can run it up to 45 psi. At 45 psi, you're going to be running at 400,000 RPMs, and that's a lot. If you go with the motor tools, whether it's a Dremel or a Fordham or whatever, you'll run anywhere from 30,000 to 40,000 RPM is be your maximum that you can run on those. With those, you'll experience a significant amount of torque with these, and I'll talk about that a little bit more here in a few minutes. With this, it's like writing with a pencil, because if you touch the wood with it, you've made a mark. And it really has not any torque at all, hardly. It has a little bit, but not much in doing with that.
The dentist, didn't you demo one time you used some kind of a dentist drill?
It's the same as a dental drill, yes. Yeah, in case you're wondering what the dentist does in your mouth, this will give you a good idea when you're using it as to what's going on with your teeth. Okay, air compressors. Like I said, we have our shop out at the village is in conjunction with the maintenance shop, and the maintenance has a big air compressor that maintains 125 psi. And we have 2 outlets in our shop that come from there. And so I simply plug this thing into that, and I get with this, I can reduce it down to the 34 that I use, and it runs just fine. Sitting on the floor over here that you've heard running a few minutes ago and is an air compressor by Silair or Silair. I'm not sure how they pronounce it. It's silent air, and it sounds about the same as your refrigerator when your refrigerator is running. And if you're doing a whole lot of work with the high-speed carver and you've got that thing sitting next to you, you don't want one of these that makes a lot of noise, because it'll drive you crazy through the day's time. And this one, you don't even notice it. The only thing about this one is that I need a very small fan to blow air over it, or it gets too hot if I'm sitting out in the porch on the sunshine and it gets too hot. But if I have a small fan blowing over it, then it keeps it down to just where it'll run all day long and no problem at all. So I have been highly impressed with the Silairs. Incidentally, this is the way I hook mine up in my shop. I put this on my lathe. It fits nicely on the bed using the little grip, and gripped it on there. It also provides me a nice little place at the end to put the handpiece. So I have a nice rest, and it works real well. So I just took a picture of it so you could see how I do it in my shop. You probably would need also some sort of dust removal system or something to keep the dust from coming up in your air. This thing is really nice because there are vents down here that tend to blow the dust away from you while you're carving. This one doesn't. And this one makes a lot of dust sometimes. And you don't want to breathe all that. So Penn State sells a little unit that's about this big, has a filter across, has 3 fans, each with their own motor on there. And you can use 1, 2, or 3 of them. You can adjust the speed as that, and the whole unit sells for $200. We've got one, and I don't ever use it. A fan over your shoulder works just as well, and that's pretty much. But when Peggy, my wife, was doing most of the carving, she really enjoyed having that fan, that dust collector in front, and it worked very well for him. Okay. Each one of these tools requires a burr in the end of it in order to do your carving. These burrs are found in different places. These, can you see that? If I put it down, I won't be. You see the burr in the end of that? That's called a football burr, and is used to remove a lot of material. And I'll show you that later. These three burrs are used for piercing, and you go through the wood and then make your holes with them. They're cylindrical and are like small drills, but gives you the opportunity to pierce the wood and then open up the hole in a way. So you can get those from Fordham, same place that makes this thing right here. They're just as cheap there as they are from any place else that you get the burrs. And the ones that go in here in the high speed are these little things. And a good source is if you have a nice dentist who is willing to run the burrs through the sterilizer and give them to you, you can get them, because dentists now are using the burrs one time and throwing them away. Some dentists will not give you the burrs. I think they're afraid of some disease happening or something like that, or they may even have some contract with the provider of the burrs, but some dentists will. And I used to have one. He's retired now, but I had one who was quite willing to run his burrs through the sterilizer and then give them to me at the end. So I had lots of burrs in different shapes. But, yes?
Are those shanks pretty universal in size?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, they are. I say yes, but there is, collars will be used in this one. This one, these burrs are very simple. You simply put them in, push them in, and that's it. And to get them out, you just push it out with the top and they pop right out. And so that works quite easily, and actually these are not bad either, but they have different size collets that fit. I don't know why they make the shanks in different sizes. I really don't. In fact, it seems like the bigger the burr, the smaller the shank. Which to me doesn't make sense, but I'm sure there's a reason for that and doing it. But anyway, they are different in size. Okay, these burrs come in carbide burrs or diamond burrs. The carbide burrs will do a good job of aggressively removing material. The diamond burrs are used mostly to smooth out the rough areas that you've done with the carbide. So there are two kinds to use, and that's basically what you're using for them. Okay, patterns. You can get patterns from many different places. Some of you are artists and you can draw the pattern yourself. With a nice soft pencil, you can take your wood and you can draw on there the pattern that you want to do. I'm not that good. So I go to the computer quite often and I find things like the Tower of Texas, or Tower of Americas, and run a picture off and then put it on a thing that I'll show you what I'll do with in a few minutes on here to trace off. If you have a digital camera, I've taken pictures of bluebonnets that I've used to then carve into wood. I've taken pictures of dogwood blossoms. And we've got several pieces at home that my wife won't let me take out of the house that are of dogwood blossoms that we carved, and then she painted light pink in places, and they're really quite beautiful. There are many books with free designs in them, copyright free. You can use those, or you can buy commercial patterns and use them. So you can get patterns in many different places. Once you get a pattern, you need to be able to apply a pattern to the vessel. I use these stencil sheets that I get from SCM, and they look like this. I'll pass this around so you can see it. It has one edge where it has a break in it, and you can peel off this back, and then it just sticks onto the piece that you're working on. This is one I did. One of the Beads of Courage boxes I did. I carved that into the top of it and inlaid turquoise. So you can just see what that looks like in there. Those things are sold by SCM. They are $1 a sheet, or for $70 you can buy a box of 100. And my wife a long time ago bought a box of 100, and I'm still using them. So they last a long time if you go that way. And okay, you can place the stencil right on here, and there was another one that I had here that I was going to show you on how you might apply the pattern. I like Roadrunners. I've done a number of Roadrunners, and this guy is going to go on this thing. So what I usually do in applying the pattern is put it on here until I decide that that's pretty much the way I want it to go, is line it up so that I've got the tail where I want it, and the head and the beak and the feet. And can you see the marks, the pencil marks on there? I mark a pencil mark there, there, and there on this pattern and on the wood. And so if that's where I want it, then I take the stencil This is the fun part, because this stuff loves to stick. But then I can line the marks up. Another thing is you can pull it off too. Thank you. That's pretty close. You put your stencil on like that.
Are you running your stencils through a printer? Is that how
Yes, yes. I'm sorry. I kind of skipped over that step, didn't I? This particular Roadrunner came off the computer, a picture, that I just printed off a black and white copy on my printer, and then I have a copier. I have a Canon copier, and I put the pattern in there, and then I take a piece of this stuff and I run it through the copier, and it copies that on here. And then you can take that and then put it on your wood. But you do need a copier to be able to do that, and to be able to run the stencil through there. But it really works well. I like the Canon because it lets me enlarge or reduce. So once I print the pattern off of the computer, I can then size it to whatever size I need on the piece that I'm working on. And I often have to reduce the size, but sometimes I need to enlarge them. But you can put them on, and then they come on like that. Okay. Once you get your stencil on there, then you need to trace it off with the smallest burr you can find. And I would use this one. You can see I've actually already traced this off, but I would trace it off just like that, all the way around. And incidentally, when you're doing letters, you got to be careful or you're going to lose part of your letters when you cut them out. So if you use your computer to type out what you want and then make the stencil to put it on here, you have to add some spaces like right here, and here. You'll see in this piece there's a little connection here, here. If you don't do that in the E, you lose all of the center of the E out of it. And the same with the A. You would lose all that out, and it really doesn't look right. So if you'll pass that one around, you'll see. I usually take a pencil and then just make marks like this. It reminds me that that's where I need to stop when I get there, and I don't cut the whole thing out. So once I've traced it off, I recommend a razor blade, but the Woodturner's best friend, the pocket knife, works quite well too. And you can get under the edge of the stencil, maybe. Oh, I really stuck this one on.
Is that a small round burr you're using?
Yes, very, very small.
It's round.
It is round on the end, yes. Incidentally, I have some notes here that I'll pass out at the end of this demonstration if you're interested in knowing where these companies are and how to get them on the computer. And, but you can see this stuff comes off a little more difficult than needs to be sometimes. And you want to make sure you get it all off, or when you start applying your finish, you'll find a little place that something doesn't look right. And that's where that is. Believe me, I've been there. Incidentally, Christmas is coming up. And if you want to make little pieces, that piece that I'm passing around there, and this piece, this was just a practice piece. I really wasn't planning on keeping this for anything, but once I got started on it, it looked like it would be something worth showing you this evening of how this works. So you have to get all that little bit of stencil off between these letters as well.
only sell it as clear.
That's the only place I've ever found it. Yeah. So I don't know. Like I said, incidentally, Christmas is coming up, and that's something. And Nick's holding one. He's really got one of the better ones that I did one time. It has a band of turquoise around the center here, and and it's made so that a tea light can fit in here, one of the little battery-operated tea lights, and you can do things. This is all done with the high-speed carver. None of this was done with the Fordham because of the detail of this. And you pass that around, and this was this is another. These are just some ideas for your Christmas gifts or decorations. You can make little things like this. This one has a tea light in there. I drill a hole. I think it's 1 1/4 inch Forstner bit that takes it. And that will make a tea light fit just perfectly in there. Oh well, this one's in there. So be it. But anyway, they make nice Christmas gifts, and people enjoy having those. Yeah, okay.
All of that wood you got up there is ash?
No, some of it is. That's Bradford pear that you've got in your hand right there, and doing it. Okay. When you start, once you got your pattern on there, once you've traced it, and you're ready to start carving on the piece that you're working on, sometimes you might discover that you didn't turn that darn thing thin enough, and piercing it is going to be difficult if you're using particularly a hardwood like this piece of ash. And incidentally, that came off the computer too, and that's going to be on here. You can see, as well as the Indian. But if you discovered that you're pretty thick, but you do want to pierce holes around here, I suggest you use the football. And I have a foot feed on this too that makes it better. But you can take this the burr rotates in a clockwise direction. It cuts more aggressively if you use it in that direction. However, you have better control if you pull it towards you like this. And particularly if you're working right up against where your pattern is, where the piece is that you want to work on, if you, sorry about that, if you go in this direction, it tends to run better than pulling it this way, where it's like carving with a knife. I'll pass this one around and you can see how I use that football to pull the wood away from what I wanted to stand out, which was the Indian's head. And you pull that out, and it looks like you almost pasted something on there. You actually didn't, and you brought it out of the wood by carving down on some of that. Incidentally, when you have cracks in wood, don't throw it out all the way. Sometimes cracks make a nice decorative thing if you got a little leather back in the handle somewhere, and then make him a staff or something on this side and put that on there. So you can pass that one around. You see how you pull the wood away. Incidentally, this is very, very, very rough work here, but I'll pass this around to show you that how I've started it, and you can see how you would pull that stuff away, and it also makes it stand out. Carbide burrs, as I said, are more aggressive, where your diamond burrs would be used more to, I don't even have a diamond burr in here. I'm sorry I didn't bring one this evening, but you have a lot of different things that probably I'll be using. I'll probably use this to smooth out from around the edges after I've cut that with the burr. I'll use this little sanding disc that also goes in here, and it will fit in there, and you can sand that out with this, and that's a whole lot better than trying to do it by hand like this. And incidentally, what we're talking about tonight is power carving. I admire all of you who do hand carving, but I've never been able to accomplish that to any great extent, so I do power carving and working with it. Yeah, there's a diamond burr. Diamond burrs look like this often, and they're embedded with diamonds, and they smooth out your rough work when you're using that as well. You're doing that. Okay, you also need to give depth to your carving, and sometimes that's difficult. Some people can't see the depth and see how to take care of that. I don't know how to tell you to do that except to look at whatever it is that you're doing and see the depth that's there. On doing that, for this piece, I have already carved down here and given it some depth. It's still very, very rough. But I wanted to show you depth by carving this piece up here at the top. We're going to do that with a high-speed carver and using a small cylindrical burr. This is not as small as. Incidentally, I use these too. As my good doctor told me when he gave me my physical, you're in good shape. The only thing wrong with you is that you're blind as a bat and you're deaf as a fire plug. Other than that, you're in pretty good shape. All right, a rose, the petals come out, right? And they get smaller as they get toward the center. So you would need to bring depth to those. And I would do that by starting, this would be the bottom petal right here, and it And as you can see with this, if you touch it, it makes a mark. I don't want to bore you with this. I know some of it's kind of like watching paint dry, but
You're working on the outline of the road, or?
I'm giving the rose some depth. The petals would have a little depth to them. And once again, as I say, this is very rough. I will be doing a lot of refining on this. I sit down. I have a chair that I sit in. I usually am holding this in my lap. I bought one of those articulated things at SWAT one year, and I kept trying to use it. Your chuck screws into it, then you can put this in your chuck, and you can turn it just virtually any direction that you want. But I found that's too slow. You have to move it, move it, move it, move it. Whereas in my lap, I can just turn it any way I want to. And that's the way I usually work with it. The nice thing about using these high-speed carvers is that you don't get so tired as when you're using this thing. This thing requires you to hang on, and with these, it's so easy to use. I'm sorry I'm giving you guys so much trouble with the videos.
Don't move.
Don't move. I'm going to pass this around, but remember, it's very, very rough. I have a lot of refining to do on this. Incidentally, when you're doing leaves, I've got one here somewhere that I'll show you in a minute that is totally incorrect. The center rib in a leaf stands out. Your tendency with this is to mark it and you have it standing going down. So you'll notice in this one that I've tried to make the little rib in the center stand out a little bit instead of going down with this. And I'm sorry I moved. Yeah, it's much easier sitting down. Now, this is not the thinnest of burrs. I would take a really, really fine burr and see if I can find one here in a second.
Is your burr, when you're cutting there, are you actually burning the wood a little bit to get some of that dimension look to it?
To burn some of it?
Is it burning it, like charring it?
Yeah, it will if you're not careful.
That gives some of the dimension to it, doesn't it?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I've got a little burner that I use sometimes to, in fact, that Indian that was going around, I use the burner on it a whole lot to give some depth and some interest to it as well. This one's about the smallest one I have. I would even go to the point of undercutting this. That burr, I just started right there at that and pulled it out. With this burr, I would undercut that. So that it looks like the petals are overlapping even better. Yes. It's probably running, this one's probably running around 350,000 because I don't have it set at 45 psi. It's a little lower than 45 psi. But it does run fast. Well, you know what? My wife taught me how to do most of this. She did I did the turning, she did the carving for a long time till her hands got so bad that she just couldn't hold the pieces and use the tools anymore. And so she sort of gave me some instructions as to how some of this could work. She's always been good at critiquing me, whatever I do. That's exactly right. I grew up in Shreveport, Louisiana. And when I got in the military and I was speaking several times, my wife says, "You sure have a southern accent. Did you know that?" I said, "No, I didn't realize it." She said, "I think you ought to work on that." Well, I did, so it's not as bad as it used to be, but well, what's that? That's right. My sister lived in Lake Charles, Louisiana, and I was up at Francis E. Warren Air Force Base in Cheyenne, Wyoming. And she called one time and couldn't get me, and then she called back after I got home. She said, "I've been trying to get you. Where y'all been?" I said, "We were at the theater." She says, "Where?" I said, "At the theater." She said, "Oh, y'all mean the theater." Yeah, that's where we were, sis. Okay. I won't bore you anymore with this, but you can pass that around and see a little bit of how I started. And again, I say this is rough work. This is not finished work.
You sanded the piece before you put the stencil on it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
What grit?
I don't know why I sand them down so much. If I'm going to put holes in them, it really doesn't matter. Uh,
Just like that.
but I usually do in doing that. So anyway, that's how you put a little depth through there. And this is a magnolia blossom. And I wanted it to stand out a little bit, so I pierced this thing to get with the holes in order for the blossom to stand out a little bit here. And in piercing, sometimes you get it right and sometimes you don't. This one, that's not too bad. This piece, the holes are too small. And this is something you need to look at when you're doing your piece, is to the size of the holes that you make while piercing. This one, the eagle came out pretty good, but the holes are so small the eagle does not stand out like I wanted it to. It's not too bad, but it's not as good as I would want it. So when you start piercing through here, then you're going to want to decide how big you want to make those holes. And probably it will be according to whatever size piece you're working on. Now this one, I have some a guy out at the village went to Colorado and he brought back some ponderosa pine. I do not like to turn pine of any sort, ponderosa or otherwise. But this guy brought 3 or 4 pieces and I thanked him. He said, well, you know, I'd appreciate it if you'd make me a vase or something out of it. I said, okay, I can do that. Well, the pine was really wet. Have you ever put any wet pine on the lathe? I did one time, and it came out that I couldn't see through my glasses, and I got stuff all over me, all over the lathe, all over the floor. There was sap everywhere from that pine coming out. Well, I waited a while for this stuff to get dry. And now I've got a guilt complex because the man that brought this is in hospice right now, and I don't know how long he's going to be with us to do anything. So I started to try to turn a piece, and it is not the kind that I would really want to put my name on, you know, the kind of stuff. But I brought this along to show you that the pine cones, you give depth to the different pieces of the pine cone as well in there. And it gives me a good chance to show you a little bit about piercing. Piercing, you don't use the football. That's for removing a lot of material. Like I said, I don't know why they make different size shanks and all these different collets you have to. I guess that's probably it. What I'm going to use is this piece. I don't know whether you can see that or not.
Put it on the paper. Put it on the, yeah.
Towards me? Yeah. It's like a drill bit, basically. The flutes are a little closer together than you'd find in a drill bit, but it's basically like that, and it has a point on the end of it so that you can go through the wood. I've already put the collet on there. This one, I can get this back on by leaving the burr in there. Some of them, burrs are so big you have to put them in after you put the collet in here.
But that one wear out pretty fast.
Wear out depends on the wood you're using, of course, and but I find they last pretty good while. And what you need to do to them, though, they do get dirty, and you take that little brush and you clean the flutes and go back and dirty them up again. But,
I imagine those two pieces that you brought before sanding them.
yeah. Now, see if I can get up here a little closer. In putting holes, I usually start by somebody asked me one time if I drew out the pattern that I was going to cut these holes. No, I just go punching holes in it. You just have to remember you don't want to go through the sides of one of the other holes, and you don't want to leave your piece so that it falls out after you've punched holes all around it either. You don't want your holes to be symmetrical. You want them to be different, each one to be a little bit different. And so, you know, when you put a hole in it, just go after it and make it whatever direction you want to make it. You get the idea of that? This,
Cutting edge on the side of that bird?
I'm sorry.
You have a cutting edge on the side?
Yes, that the flutes on there cut. Yeah, it's not just to go through, but the flutes on the side cut that. Another reason I brought this piece of pine is that it's easier to put holes in than this ash and these other things.
On your design there, did you cut those with that particular bit
Yeah. I'm sorry, did I cut?
on your design? You know,
Oh,
the hose on your design?
yeah,
Did you use
yeah,
that bit?
yeah, I did. you can see these are pine needles that are going out, and I cut the holes in between them, and I use this to do that. Then I go back with this. Once I've punched holes in there, I go back with this thing. I need a bit in there though, a burr to do any good.
You make those holes different shapes, but do you try to keep them relatively the same size for a pattern?
It depends. Sometimes when you're particularly doing it around the pattern that you've already worked on, you have different size holes in order to accommodate the pattern, and also to I don't know, you just make it look different. So slightly bigger, slightly smaller. They don't all have to be exactly the same size in there, and that. What?
You ever lose the bits?
Ever?
Like drop them in a pile of shit?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. But yeah. After I do that though, I often go back with the high-speed carver, and we'll refine these. And hear the compressor come on. Another technique that I often use, and probably will on this when punching this, that I will take this and I'll rough up the top of this smooth edge that I've sanded down so nicely to work with. But I'll take this bit and I'll rough up the edges, because this is a rustic piece, and this gives it a more rustic look by doing that to it. I'm just taking it and just going after it in any sort of old way that you can. Got any questions on that?
Have you used that, you will sand the inside of your piercings?
Yeah.
Smooth the inside edges?
Yeah. I usually take a piece of sandpaper that fits in my hands and go in this way with it, instead of trying to go this way. This way, the paper tends to hang up on your. And some of these I'll get so thin that if I hang up in, I'm going to break. So these walls that I was doing here are rather thick, but I have made some that are pretty darn thin, and they look really nice when you do that too. So wall thickness, I think 1/4 of an inch is an absolute maximum thickness that you can work with. I like it thinner than that. And particularly when you're working on something like this, this is ash. This is ash. And ash is hard. This stuff is really hard. And this one's going to be very difficult. So probably what I will do after getting the pattern going, I'll take that football and I'm going to take a lot of this off, because I can look down through the center of that and see that the wall thickness is just too thick to easily punch holes through there. It's nice working with this when you get it down thin enough, because the walls of the holes are strong in wood like this. So you're not nearly as likely to break through the holes in the wood. I have broken through a few, so some of the holes wound up being a whole lot bigger than I had anticipated in doing that. But yeah, one thing I skipped over a while ago that I didn't mention was that when you have the piece on the lathe, and this is on the lathe, and I decided I thought the Tower of Americas would be good to put on there. So I had this on the lathe. So I set my tool rest up and I drew a line where I wanted the center of the Tower of Americas to be on here. And then when I take this, well, that's the other side. When I take this and I will line it up with that line there and there, and then I'll have my towers straight on the piece like I want it. I often take my depth gauge, go in here, then bring it out and mark a line down here that says don't go below this line or you're going to get into some really thick wood. And also I will make a line around the top sometimes that I don't want to go any farther up than there in order to leave a nice strong band across the top. So there's a lot you can do with marking on the lathe to help you when you start a pattern. There's a bluebonnet that I took a picture of, and I thought the Tower of America representing San Antonio and the bluebonnets on this side representing Texas would make a nice piece. So that's what this one will come out being later. Now, I brought this along just to show you. This is a piece of elm, which I always thought was just garbage wood. And but I turned the bowl, and my wife says, you know, that's a really nice bowl, but it's kind of plain. And she was still carving at that time. So she said, let me work on that. And she carved this, and I'm going to pass this around so you can see the depth that she put into this basket weave that goes around this, and how she came out even after going all the way around. I have no idea. But if you break that, I cannot go home. Ever. Ever.
She did all of that freehand. You didn't index it on the lathe?
Yeah.
To start?
She had a pattern for the basket weave
Okay.
that she put on there.
Right.
But I had turned the bowl, yeah, and then she put the pattern on it and did the basket weave around there. She said she almost went blind by the time she got through with that. But you can see it really takes a plain bowl and makes it something special by putting something like this on it. I have taken bowls where, you've seen my bowls that I come over the top, and I have turquoise around the edges, but with that lip that comes over the top, you can put flowers or ivy or just something around on the top of that, and it gives it another dimension to look at, and really makes it nice to do that. So when you get through with all that, hopefully you can come out with something that looks like this. This has a fawn on one side and a fox kit on the other with a bunch of dogwood blossoms around it. And if you break that, I can't go home either. But yeah, that if that's pretty much all I was going to show you this evening in this, except to talk about finishing the vessel after you get through. Once you've carved it and pierced holes in it.
Hold it into the camera.
Right here?
Over here.
Tell me when.
Gene, is the ash you're using Arizona ash, or is it real more like baseball bat ash?
I'm not sure. I think it's Arizona ash. The reason I say that is somebody dumped the tree at the gate, back gate of our village down there. And it was a huge tree, and but had some beautiful, beautiful wood in it. And so I go out with my chainsaw and start whacking up and getting some pieces. And it comes out. You get that? Okay. Well, this is pretty sturdy, actually. You know, that's ash wood. No. Okay.
That you go home.
Okay. But, yeah, and you can see that I got awfully thick down here. So I had to do a lot of football work down here. And still, it's very, very thick. And, you know, we're asking about different sizes. Now, I actually didn't break anything here, but this is a long hole because it seemed to go well with the leg of the deer there in doing that. And there's another one that's a long one, and another one, because it seemed to emphasize the deer quite well. And
Okay, on that box, right about the shoulder, front shoulder.
yeah.
Was that an intentional?
Yeah, that's all. I didn't break any of them on this one. It was amazing. I didn't break a single one. And even down here, that's, you know, there's a lot that's open there, but it was done on purpose in order to make the kit stand out in doing that. So, yeah. Now, in the finish of these things, Again, I have a pecan vase that I turned that's it's a little smaller than this, just a little smaller than that. And my wife took it when she was still carving and carved dogwood blossoms like this on it and a hummingbird going in the house. And she painted this with some of her paints, and she uses acrylic paints with a dryer in it to use it on the wood, and it really came out beautiful with the little pink in the dogwood blossoms and the hummingbird with a little blue and green on the hummingbird. So you can paint this with acrylics. I don't know how wood stains would work. Some of the alcohol stains tend to bleed out with a little problem. Acrylic paints don't, so it'd be easier. And I'm not sure. I guess oil paints could be used depending on what your final finish would be, if that would accommodate, if the oil paints would accommodate the finish coming on there. But use your favorite finish. My favorite finish is the general finish that you see out here on the shelf. I use a water-based polyacrylic clear gloss finish. And I use the gloss because it doesn't have any of the material in it that makes it not glossy. But I like the glossy because I use a HVLP sprayer, and I use a sanding sealer first, and then 2 to 3 coats of the gloss finish, sanding between each finish, each coat. And then the final coat, I take 4/0 steel wool and cut back that gloss so that what you see is the wood instead of the finish. And then I put a very light coat of clear wax on it. And that's the way I finish all my pieces. That's the way this one is finished. This one, you can see this is glossy because I didn't go over that with steel wool. I only went over this part with the steel wool. This would have been absolutely impossible to do. So I didn't even try on doing that. Okay. Pardon? Same thing. It's the same finishes, same number of coats, 4-0 steel wool, spray the inside. I do. Yeah. Well, I have to do this on my deck out and back, and I have a table and a turntable that I use. And if I were finishing this, I would spray the bottom of it first and somewhere around this so that I could put it here to dry. Then after that dries, then I'll turn it over and I would spray the inside, and then I would spray the rest of the outside. And then I can put it back up to dry. And do that 4 times by the time you do the sanding sealer in 3 coats. But I'm pleased with the finish that I get on there when I do that. And I actually started using a water-based finish when we lived in Colorado. And we built our retirement home up there, halfway between Colorado Springs and Denver, over in the foothills, west of Castle Rock, a place called Perry Park. Beautiful house, looked out on the valley like the Garden of the Gods with the red rock formations. We had 3,000 square feet up and 3,000 square foot basement. And the end of that, half of that basement was my shop. But believe me, in wintertime, you didn't open the window. And trying to use any of these finishes that smell so badly and are bad for your health was very difficult. So I went to water-based finish at that point, working with it. And they have improved water-based finishes so much that they're just as good in my estimation as any of the other finishes. So it's just your personal preference, really, as to what you use.
You said you spray it off?
Yes.
I didn't know that general finish comes with the spray off.
Well, you can, yeah, almost, those general finishes you can. An HVLP sprayer. Yeah. It has 3 turbines in it, so it's provides a good solid 10 psi and sprays quite well, as long as I keep it adjusted right and doesn't hold it in the wrong place too long. So yeah, I like the General finish. Actually, General bought out a company called Watt-R Base, W-A-T-R Base Finish. And I started with them, and they were really, it was really good, and they were so good that the General bought them out. And now what General is using is the same thing that Water-Base was using at that point, and it works very well for me. That is it. If you would like to come up and try to punch a few holes in here, I wouldn't mind. You're doing that if you want to, just to see how that works. But other than that, that is the end of this demonstration.